Wow, what a moment. The discipline, the composure. This royal guard just proved why you never mess with tradition. But what do you think? Was the guard's reaction justified, or should he have handled it differently? Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing our community from all over the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss tomorrow's special story. It's one you definitely won't want to miss. Turn on notifications and we'll see you in the next one. The moment everyone was waiting for, the guard finally strikes back. The morning sun bathed the city in a golden glow, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. It was a scene that played out every day, yet it never failed to captivate. Tourists from around the world had gathered near the Grand Palace gates, their cameras clicking as they marveled at the sight before them. But amidst the excited chatter and the steady hum of movement, there stood one figure who remained completely still, a royal guard. Dressed in a perfectly pressed red tunic, his gleaming buttons reflecting the sunlight, he was the picture of discipline. His tall bearskin hat added to his commanding presence, a symbol of a long-standing tradition that stretched back centuries. His ceremonial weapon rested firmly at his side, a reminder that while he may appear motionless, his duty was anything but passive. He was not just standing there, he was guarding history itself. Among the crowd, a young boy named Ethan clutched his mother's hand, his eyes wide with wonder. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, and like many children, he was fascinated by the soldier who stood so perfectly still. Tugging at his mother's sleeve, he pointed toward the guard and whispered, "Mom, why doesn't he move?" His mother smiled, bending down to speak softly into his ear. "Because it's his job, sweetheart. It takes incredible discipline to stand like that. He's one of the best trained soldiers in the country." Ethan's expression shifted from curiosity to admiration. To him, the guard now seemed less like a statue and more like a superhero, someone with an unshakable will and unwavering strength. He wasn't just any soldier. He was a symbol of pride, of duty, of something bigger than himself. Not everyone in the crowd, however, shared the same respect. Some saw the guard as nothing more than an attraction, a backdrop for their vacation photos. A group of teenagers made faces at him, daring one another to try and make him flinch. Others posed beside him, treating him like a prop rather than a person. But through it all, the guard remained unfazed. His training had prepared him for moments like this. His discipline was not just physical, it was mental. As the morning went on, the crowds grew larger, their voices blending into a steady hum of excitement. But no matter how many people gathered, no matter how many eyes were on him, the royal guard stood as he always had, silent, strong, and unshaken. The crowd around the palace gates continued to grow, the hum of conversation blending with the clicks of cameras. The royal guard stood as he always did, motionless, focused, unwavering. But while tourists admired his discipline, another figure moved through the crowd, unnoticed at first. Jake Miller, a 42-year-old man, staggered forward, his movements clumsy and unsteady. His once neat button-down shirt was now wrinkled and stained, and his breath reeked of whiskey. In his right hand, he clutched a half-empty bottle, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes, bloodshot and heavy, scanned the scene with a mixture of confusion and resentment. The previous day had been the worst of his life. After 18 years at the same job, he had been fired, just like that. No warning, no second chance. His boss handed him a termination letter, and suddenly, everything he had worked for was gone. The bills were piling up, his family depended on him, and he had no idea what to do next. So he did the only thing that made sense in that moment. He drank. And he kept drinking until the sharp sting of reality dulled into a heavy haze. Now, standing in front of the Grand Palace, staring at the perfectly still soldier in red, all he felt was rage. The sight of the guard, disciplined, controlled, unmoving, felt like an insult. To Jake, this man represented everything unfair about the world. While he was falling apart, this soldier stood tall, unaffected, untouchable. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. He took another shaky step forward, his grip tightening around the bottle. The tourists near him sensed something was off. A few glanced in his direction, their smiles fading. But Jake didn't care. His anger burned too hot. "Look at this guy," he muttered loudly, his voice slurred but filled with contempt. Standing there like a damn statue. For what? What's he even doing? A few tourists exchanged uneasy glances. Some backed away, but others kept watching, intrigued. Jake's voice grew louder. You think you're better than me? He sneered, pointing a shaking finger at the guard. You think standing there all day makes you important? The guard, as always, didn't react. His eyes remained locked forward, his expression carved from stone. But Jake wasn't done. Not yet. He took another step closer, the bottle still clutched in his hand. The crowd watched in silence, sensing that something was about to happen. The tension in the air was thick. The crowd, once full of cheerful tourists snapping pictures, had grown silent. All eyes were now on Jake Miller, the drunken man whose rage was boiling over. His gaze locked onto the royal guard, his face twisted with frustration. Jake took another unsteady step forward, his 6-foot frame looming just a little too close. The half-empty whiskey bottle in his hand sloshed as he waved it wildly. His words, slurred but filled with venom, cut through the air. You think you're better than me? He spat, his voice louder now, almost daring the guard to respond. You stand here, dressed up in your little red coat, doing nothing, while the rest of us work our asses off. The guard remained still, unshaken, his eyes fixed straight ahead. To anyone who didn't understand his training, it might have looked like he wasn't even listening. But he was. He noticed every movement, every shift in the air around him. His discipline wasn't just physical, it was mental, built through years of training to endure exactly this kind of provocation. Jake, however, mistook the silence for weakness. He let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, that's what I thought. You can't even say a damn word, huh? A few tourists whispered among themselves, glancing at each other nervously. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that things were escalating. A woman cautiously stepped forward, her voice shaky. Sir, maybe you should calm down, she suggested, her hands raised slightly, as if trying to defuse the situation. Jake's bloodshot eyes snapped to her. Don't tell me to calm down, he barked. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what it's like to lose everything overnight. The woman shrank back, her face pale. The crowd was shifting, some retreating while others remained, glued to the unfolding scene. The guard, still unyielding, didn't move a muscle. Jake sneered. Oh, you're good at this, huh? Playing the perfect little soldier. But let me tell you something. He took another swig from his bottle, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. You don't deserve this job. You don't deserve the respect people give you. You don't deserve anything. The words hung in the air like a thick cloud. The tension was suffocating. Some in the crowd murmured, urging the guard to respond, to put the man in his place. But the royal guard did what he was trained to do. He stood tall, silent, unmoved. Jake wasn't just angry anymore. He was furious, and he was about to do something he could never take back. Jake Miller was past the point of reason. His bloodshot eyes burned with frustration, his breath reeking of whiskey and rage. The royal guard, standing firm as ever, had not moved an inch. His silence was impenetrable, his discipline unwavering. But to Jake, that stillness felt like mockery. The crowd was holding its breath now. Some were recording, others whispering nervously. A few tourists had edged farther away, sensing that this moment was teetering on the edge of disaster. But Jake didn't care. He had lost his job, his pride, and somewhere along the way, his sense of self-control. All that was left was his anger. His grip on the bottle tightened. What's the matter? He sneered, stepping even closer, so near now that the heat of his breath could almost be felt against the guard's face. Cat got your tongue, soldier boy? Or are you just too damn afraid to do anything? Still, the guard remained impassive. His eyes never shifted, his posture never wavered. He was a wall, an unbreakable force of discipline. Jake's frustration exploded. You're a joke, he roared, his voice echoing off the palace walls. A damn puppet in a uniform. And then it happened. Jake's stomach twisted. A sudden wave of nausea hit him like a freight train. His body lurched forward as he doubled over, and before he could stop himself, he vomited. Right onto the royal guard. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people covered their mouths, horrified. Some turned away in disgust. Others, caught somewhere between shock and disbelief, stifled nervous laughter. The stain spread across the guard's pristine red tunic, the sickly smell lingering in the air. For the first time since the confrontation had begun, The royal guard moved. It was subtle, just a small shift, a tightening of the jaw, a slow inhale. But for those who understood what it meant to be a soldier, that single movement spoke volumes. Jake wiped his mouth, dazed, swaying slightly as if he wasn't sure what had just happened. Then a slow, twisted grin spread across his face. "That's what you deserve," he slurred, pointing a shaking finger at the guard. "You hear me? That's exactly what you deserve." The tension in the air was suffocating. The guard's composure had been tested. Now, he was about to show just how far that discipline truly went. For a long moment, the world seemed to freeze. The crowd, the whispers, the recording phones, none of it mattered. All eyes were locked on the royal guard, standing tall in his now defiled red tunic. Vomit dripped from the fabric, staining the symbol of centuries-old tradition. But more than that, it was an insult, not just to him but to the duty he represented. Jake Miller, still swaying unsteadily, let out a ragged, mocking laugh. "Go on, do something," he taunted, throwing his arms out wide, as if daring the guard to react. "I bet you're not even allowed to touch me." The crowd tensed. Some people whispered. Some shook their heads. A few had already stepped back, sensing the shift in energy. And then the guard moved. It was slow, deliberate. His gloved hand rose to his chest, wiping away the filth in a single measured motion. His gaze, which had been locked forward the entire time, now shifted, his eyes locked onto Jake. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was something worse, an unyielding authority that sent a chill up the drunk man's spine. Jake faltered, his smirk faded. "Step! Back!" The words weren't shouted, they weren't growled, but they cut through the air like a blade. The first words the royal guard had spoken, calm, firm, absolute. Jake blinked as if the command had momentarily sobered him, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Or what?" he scoffed, his bravado returning in a weak attempt to cover his unease. "You gonna arrest me, soldier boy?" The guard didn't answer. Instead, he took a single step forward. The crowd gasped. The movement was controlled, but powerful. Instantly, Jake's confidence cracked. He stumbled backward, but it was too late. In one swift motion, the guard's gloved hand snapped forward. He seized Jake's wrist, forcing his fingers to release the whiskey bottle, which shattered against the cobblestone. In the same breath, he turned Jake around and pinned him against the palace gate with precise, practiced efficiency. The crowd erupted. Some gasped, some cheered, and every phone was locked onto the scene. Jake struggled, but it was futile. The guard's grip was ironclad. "You've crossed the line," the guard said, his voice low but steady. "You will not disrespect this post." Palace security was already closing in. The moment was over. Jake had lost. And as he was dragged away, head hanging in shame, the royal guard simply straightened his uniform and resumed his post, unshaken, unbroken, and more respected than ever before. What a moment! This wasn't just about a soldier standing still. It was about discipline, respect, and duty. The royal guard remained unwavering, even when pushed beyond the limits of tolerance. But let's talk about it. Do you think the guard handled it the right way? Should he have acted sooner? Or was his restraint what made the moment so powerful? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us. How would you have reacted in this situation? Would you have been able to keep your composure like the guard? Or do you think Jake got exactly what he deserved? Also, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And if you enjoyed this incredible moment of discipline and honor, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. It's even more unbelievable. Turn on notifications so you'll be the first to see it when it drops. Now let's hear your opinions. Was justice served, or should there have been a different outcome? Comment below and let's discuss.